This is a case that's been bounced around back and forth throughout the court system.
The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Justice's ruling this morning, it conflicts with the Second Amendment's right to bear arms.
Major Supreme Court ruling.
The case that could end permits nationwide. This is not a rumor. The United States Supreme Court has just made a move that could permanently change how every American exercises their right to carry. In an extraordinary step, the court has agreed to review a case called Woolford v. Lopez, a challenge that originated in Hawaii but could soon decide the fate of permit-based carry systems across the entire country. This case strikes directly at the heart of the Second Amendment and the limits of state power. It questions whether Americans must still ask for permission to exercise a constitutional right. The Supreme Court is no longer waiting for the lower courts to fix these conflicts. They are stepping in now, and the outcome could reshape gun laws from coast to coast. If you value your right to self-defense, and if you believe the Constitution means what it says, this is the moment to pay attention. Chapter 1. The Supreme Court makes a rare move. The Supreme Court rarely steps in at this stage of a case. Normally, it waits for the process to finish trial, appeals, and final judgment. But with Woolford v. Lopez, the justices broke tradition. They granted review early, long before a final ruling was reached. The case is still in the preliminary injunction phase. The court accepted it through an emergency review, which is extremely rare. This signals that the justices see a serious constitutional problem that cannot wait. It also suggests they may use this opportunity to reinforce or expand the Bruen precedent from 2022. By intervening this early, the court is sending a clear message. It will no longer tolerate lower courts undermining the Second Amendment. The time for delay is over. This case could be the foundation for a new national standard. Chapter 2. Hawaii's concealed carry law under fire. After the Bruen ruling, many states began testing the limits of what restrictions they could keep. Hawaii went even further, flipping the entire presumption of legality. Under its current law, all publicly accessible private property is off limits to concealed carry by default. You can only carry if the property owner gives verbal or written permission. Even licensed permit holders are considered unauthorized unless they prove otherwise. The law assumes criminality, not legality, reversing the traditional view of citizen rights. The result is a near-total ban on lawful carry in public spaces. A federal district court struck the law down as unconstitutional, citing Bruen. But the Ninth Circuit reversed that decision and allowed the ban to take effect again. That reversal triggered the emergency appeal and brought Hawaii's law before the Supreme Court. Chapter 3. The Department of Justice breaks from tradition. In an unexpected twist, the Department of Justice sided with gun owners. The DOJ filed a brief stating that Hawaii's restrictions went beyond constitutional limits, even by the government's own standards. The DOJ acknowledged that Hawaii's default ban model violated the Second Amendment. They admitted that public carry cannot be outlawed everywhere by assumption. The brief reinforced the principle that self-defense must remain accessible in most public places. This position gave the plaintiffs powerful support and removed much of Hawaii's legal backing. When the federal government declines to defend a state's gun law, it speaks volumes. The DOJ's stance effectively signaled that this law was indefensible, making it easier for the Supreme Court to act decisively. Chapter 4. Conflicting court rulings force action. One major reason the Supreme Court stepped in is that the lower federal courts are divided. The Third Circuit and the Ninth Circuit have issued rulings that directly contradict one another. That kind of judicial split demands resolution from the highest court. The Ninth Circuit upheld Hawaii's sweeping carry restrictions. The Third Circuit struck down similar policies as unconstitutional. This created a nationwide conflict affecting millions of gun owners. The Constitution cannot mean one thing on the East Coast and something different on the West Coast. The Supreme Court cannot ignore such contradictions. By granting review now, the justices are taking control of the narrative and ensuring that the Second Amendment has a single, unified interpretation across all states. Chapter 5. Hawaii's legal strategy starts to unravel. When Hawaii realized how serious this case had become, the state tried to delay it. They argued that the case needed more evidence, more hearings, and more time. But that strategy collapsed almost immediately. Hawaii's lawyers had previously told the Ninth Circuit that no more facts were needed. They admitted the issue was purely constitutional, not factual. Their new delay argument contradicted their own earlier statements. The Supreme Court saw through this tactic and moved forward. By changing its story mid-case, Hawaii undermined its own credibility. The justices recognized the contradiction and treated it as a signal that the state's defense had reached its limits. That misstep could end up costing them the entire case. Chapter 6. The private property trap. At the center of this case is Hawaii's radical approach to private property rights. Instead of recognizing carry as a default liberty, the state flipped the presumption. It is assumed that carrying a firearm is prohibited everywhere unless the property owner explicitly allows it. This reversal is unprecedented in American law. Gun owners now bear the burden of seeking permission before exercising a right that the Constitution guarantees by default. The district court called this approach unconstitutional, finding no historical example that justified such an assumption. The law treats all public access private property as gun-free zones unless consent is given. Even with a valid permit, a citizen must secure express approval before carrying. The lower court ruled this inversion of rights had no historical foundation. The Ninth Circuit ignored that reasoning, reinstating the ban and forcing a Supreme Court showdown. This so-called property rule is not confined to Hawaii. Other states have considered adopting it as a loophole to restrict public carry indirectly. If the court does not stop it now, this model could spread nationwide, creating a backdoor ban that violates both tradition and the plain text of the Second Amendment. Chapter 7. The Bruen Standard returns. Everything in this case traces back to the 2022 decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruen. That ruling changed the standard for evaluating gun laws. It required every restriction to align with the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment. Now, with Woolford v. Lopez, the Supreme Court has an opportunity to reaffirm and expand Bruen's reach. The justices appear ready to make it clear that lower courts cannot reinterpret or water down the standard to suit political agendas. The court will review how faithfully the lower courts are applying the Bruen framework. Any law without a strong historical precedent will be presumed unconstitutional. The goal is to ensure that rights are not balanced against modern preferences or public fears. This case could also clarify whether states can impose new rules under the label of property regulation. By returning to Bruen, the court can remind every level of the judiciary that the Second Amendment is not negotiable. It does not bend with time, and it cannot be suspended through creative legislation. Chapter 8. Lower Courts Under Scrutiny. Another purpose of this review is to correct a growing problem in the federal judiciary. Since Bruen, some lower courts have continued using outdated balancing tests, effectively ignoring the Supreme Court's clear instruction. The Ninth Circuit's ruling in favor of Hawaii is one example, and it may not be the last. The justices now have an opportunity to send a direct message to those courts. The Supreme Court's word is final and it must be followed. The Ninth Circuit's ruling upheld an almost total carry restriction, directly conflicting with Bruen. The Third Circuit's opposite decision created a split that the court must now resolve. By intervening, the justices can reaffirm their authority over defiant lower courts. The opinion may include guidance to prevent future misinterpretations of constitutional standards. If the language in the upcoming ruling is strong enough, it could permanently reshape how Second Amendment cases are handled. Judges will be forced to apply history-based reasoning instead of policy-driven opinions, restoring consistency to constitutional law. Chapter 9. The Stakes for Gun Owners Nationwide. While the case began in Hawaii, its implications extend far beyond the islands. If the Supreme Court rules broadly, permit-based carry systems could collapse across the country. The court could establish a single national rule defining the scope of lawful public carry. This would not just affect Hawaii, but also states like New York, California, Maryland, and New Jersey, where restrictive permitting systems still exist. State laws that rely on subjective approval may no longer survive judicial review. Default property bans could be declared unconstitutional. Lawful citizens could gain full recognition of their right to carry in public spaces. The court's decision could provide the foundation for future challenges to other restrictive laws. This case represents a turning point. It is not just about where a person can carry, but whether the government can continue treating self-defense as a conditional right. The court's ruling could either reinforce freedom or redefine its boundaries for generations to come. Chapter 10. What happens next? Now that the Supreme Court has officially agreed to hear Woolford v. Lopez, the legal process is moving quickly. Written briefs are being filed, oral arguments are expected soon, and a decision could arrive within months. Both sides are mobilizing, knowing that the outcome will reshape the national landscape of gun rights. The court's review focuses narrowly on the question of carrying on private property. A narrow opinion could still have sweeping effects if it reaffirms constitutional limits. States are preparing to defend their laws or rewrite them before the ruling arrives. Gun rights organizations across the country are submitting supporting briefs to strengthen the case. This is one of the most significant firearm cases since Bruen, and the decision will likely set the tone for all future Second Amendment litigation. Whether the court strikes broadly or narrowly, the result will define how far states can go in regulating self-defense in public. The next battle begins. The Supreme Court's decision to hear this case marks the start of a new chapter in America's fight for constitutional rights. Wolford v. Lopez is more than a dispute over Hawaii's laws. It is a test of whether the government can still force citizens to ask for permission to exercise a right that is supposed to belong to them already. Every filing, every argument, and every development as this case moves forward. This is where constitutional law meets real life, and the outcome will determine how far freedom truly extends. So make sure to subscribe, share this video, and stay informed. The next ruling could reshape the Second Amendment forever. Stay vigilant, stay prepared, and most importantly, stay free.